Unless you've been living under a rock for the last few years, you'll have seen one particular colour take over the popularity of new models. It's sometimes an ice blue, sometimes baby blue, sometimes powder blue, and sometimes referred to in relation to a specific brand's blue as well. Many of these models can go for crazy prices, but we'll be looking at one that is a much more accessible entry into the trend. Welcome to Addicted to Watches. Today, we'll be looking at a watch from Seiko's JDM catalogue, which, whilst it has been covered here on YouTube, I don't think has received enough, hence this video. It's got that trendy blue dial you've been seeing everywhere lately. This is the Seiko SBTR029. Like I mentioned, this watch comes from Seiko's JDM range, and it, along with quite a few other chronograph watches, offer some great designs and features for very reasonable prices. This one in particular caught my eye with its very striking dial colour. It's a dial that can shift quite dramatically from a dull blue to a vibrant almost silver colour. For that alone, I think the watch justifies its modest price tag, being available for under $150 US. In addition to that though, it also offers a reliable mecha quartz movement and solid overall construction. So, let's take a closer look at the watch, and what better place to start than the dial? Of course, the first thing you'll notice is the blue colour. Popularised by such models as the Rolex Oyster Perpetual, this and similar shades of blue became the hottest thing to have over the past few years, with many brands jumping on the bandwagon. I really like the execution of this one, as it's not so in your face about it. The strong sunburst effect means that there are times where it will often appear closer to silver or a very pale blue, and other times where it looks like that much richer blue colour. Overall, I'd say it's a less saturated blue, and as a result is more subtle. Before getting this one in, I had never handled or even really wanted to check out this colour, but I find myself really liking this one. There is more to this dial than just the colour though. In fact, there is quite a bit going on here. We've got 3 subdials as well as a date, but even with all that, it doesn't look too cluttered or busy. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the minute track is not printed onto the dial itself, but rather is on an angled chapter ring surrounding the dial, giving everything on the dial a bit more space to work with. Back to those subdials for now though, and we can see that this watch can time up to 12 hours with them, at 12 and 9. The top subdial keeps track of the minutes elapsed, and the one at 9 tracks the hours. At 6, we have the running seconds of the watch, because it is a chronograph seconds hand that's tracked by the center one. Those subdials feature minimal amounts of printing, basically just enough for you to know what's going on. They are also framed by silver sunburst rings that blend in well with the rest of the dial. Finally, at 3, we have a date complication, with a white wheel framed simply with a printed black border. Next to that date is an applied Seiko logo, and underneath that in black to match the rest of the date is the word chronograph, in case you couldn't already tell from the subdials and pushers. Moving around the dial, for most of the hours we have applied baton indices. The ones at 12, 6 and 9 have been truncated to make way for the subdials, and the one at 3 has been omitted altogether for the date. They are each filled with a loomed section down the centre and are polished on either side. Those polished sections in combination with the silver subdial frames and overall sunburst of the dial bring it all together to catch the light and really play with it. Seiko has also added an interesting little design feature on the hands of this watch. You'll notice that if you look at all the hands relating to the chronograph function of the watch, they're all painted black. The hours at 9, the minutes at 12, and the seconds on the main hand stack are all black, linking them together, whereas the main hour and minutes hands, as well as the running seconds at 6, are polished silver. It's a touch I really appreciate, to separate the hands into 2 distinct groups relating to their function. All hands are relatively simple, but the hour and minute hands have been partially skeletonized at the base, while the rest is loomed. Now, we come back to that chapter ring I mentioned. It's got the minute track printed in white against a black background to match the outer bezel, and has not only seconds, but partial seconds marked so that you can more accurately use the chronograph function if need be. All of these lines pointing inwards towards the dial really help to visually draw the eye in and bring forward that blue dial. That outer bezel is a tachymeter bezel. Tachymeters are used to measure the speed at which something is travelling based on time travelled over a fixed distance. But I don't know how practical that really is these days for most of us. Either way, it looks good. It's got a shiny reflective surface that you might have thought was ceramic, but I suspect it's just stainless steel, which is perfectly fine. Unlike on dive watches, this bezel does not turn or rotate around the watch. Since this is a budget watch, you're only getting Hardlex crystal. It is a seemingly nice piece though, and does well for itself when it comes to reflections. It is dead flat and sits fractionally higher than that tachymeter bezel. Another thing I like about this watch is just how wearable it is. When you look at lots of quartz chronograph watches from the big brands, they tend to be a bit on the larger side, but that's not the case here. The case size is officially listed at 39.8, which I think must not take the crown guards into consideration. That 39.8 is very close to what I measure the bezel at, and in reality, it basically wears like a 40. Case height is a very manageable 12mm thanks to the quartz movement inside, and lug to lug will accommodate smaller wrist sizes too at 47mm. Thankfully, a 20mm lug width rounds out the dimensions and means you'll likely already have plenty of straps to fit this one. In terms of case finishing, the top of the case is radially brushed and transitions into polished slab sides. The finishing is nothing revolutionary, but it is well done and straightforward. Neither the crown nor pushers screw down, and they are not signed either, but from this side, we can see the crown guards emerge from the case to protect the crown. Flipping the watch over, we can see something that does screw down, the case back, and it's finished in a mix of brushed and polished surfaces. Here we can see the brand logo engraved, as well as the usual spec sheet. From back here, we also get a look at the first part of the watch, which is a little bit of a letdown. You can see the end links of the bracelet are hollow rather than solid. Now, keeping in mind the price of the watch, it's not particularly surprising. Turning it around to the front again, we are presented with a bracelet that looks like a 3-piece link, but is actually just one designed to look like 3. It's brushed on top and polished on the side, matching the finishing of the case, and unfortunately from the side here, we can see a faint line breaking up the polish. That is the giveaway that the links are not solid either, but folded. Admittedly, they are folded well and don't feel bad at all, but they are folded. As it leaves the case, it tapers ever so slightly from 20 to 18mm. By this point, as we approach the clasp, you should know what to expect. It's a pressed clasp with the Seiko logo engraved into the outer shell. No fold over, but it is opened by these 2 pushers on the side, and allows for 2 positions of adjustment. While each individual element of the bracelet, i.e. the links, end links and clasp, are all hollow and pressed, when you're holding and wearing the watch, they don't really feel it. It actually feels reasonably solid, especially for the price. Seiko has come a long way since the old Seiko 5 bracelets. It's not something I'd say you'd think about changing immediately upon getting the watch, and I could happily live with it for a while. Before we get it on wrist, there's one other thing I'd like to talk about. That's the movement powering the watch. It's the Seiko 8T63, or you might know it better as the VK63. It's present in many recent AliExpress chronograph watches too. One in particular I saw recently was a Boltony Pilot's chronograph. Both of these watches are available for around that $150 USD mark. So, thinking about it from this perspective, you're getting a very good package from a big brand here with Seiko. Okay, time to get it on wrist and see how it wears. I talked about the compact size, and here on my 7-inch wrist you can see that in action. It sits really well. The lugs curve down with the angle of my wrist, and the relatively low height makes it very comfortable to wear. As I turn my wrist, you can also see the way that the dial catches the light and changes dramatically. If we change it up with a brown leather strap, we get a pretty different look at the watch, but it still looks good in my opinion. I saw online other people paired it with a grey suede strap. In those pictures it looked really good, so I thought I'd try it myself, and was pretty pleased with the results. We come now to the time of the video where I talk about the things I don't really like about the watch. Of course, you know what's going to come up here. The bracelet on paper leaves a lot to be desired with its hollow construction. However, on wrist it's not something you notice, and if having a solid bracelet would have pushed up the price by a significant margin, I'm happy to live with the one we got. What I think it really comes down to with this watch is how much you want or need that trendy dial color. If you don't, there are plenty of other variations from Seiko to choose from, and if you do, This is a solid, affordable way to have something trendy on your wrist that looks much more expensive than the modest price would suggest. What do you think about this watch? Have you seen these JDM chronographs before? Do you have a watch already with this light blue color on the dial? Would you add one of these to your collection? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.